What's going on YouTube? My name is Marcus, aka Apostle, and today we're going to talk about the gauntlets in Spellbreak. There are 6 at this point: Stone, Frost, Lightning, Fire, Wind, and Toxic. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what each gauntlet does, where they work best, and which ones I think are best. Before we get into that though, I just want to let you guys know that I live stream every day, so if you have any questions about Spellbreak or just feel like hanging out, feel free to check that out. It's down in the description below. Anyways, let's get right into the gauntlets. First up on our list, we have the Stone Gauntlet. The Stone Gauntlet is a short to medium range gauntlet with a long time in between casts. The stone's projectile is pretty slow, and as you can see, it travels along the ground, so you can only hit people a few feet up off the ground or if they're on the ground itself. Otherwise, the projectile will just go straight underneath them. The projectile can be blocked by items on the ground. It's actually better at going down slopes than it is climbing up things, so keep that in mind when you're using this gauntlet. The Stone Gauntlet is more based on timing than aim because you don't have to aim up or down at all since the projectile is attached to the ground. What this means is that you have to time your projectile to hit the enemy as they touch the ground. Because this gauntlet is a little bit unintuitive, it's really good against new players. But once players have experience against this gauntlet, they can learn to outplay it fairly easily. It really just comes down to staying up on a platform that the projectile can't reach. If you do manage to hit the enemy with the Stone Gauntlet, it actually does a lot of damage, so that's a plus. That being said, it is a pretty situational gauntlet and is really only useful in big open fields. Or you can keep it hidden and surprise your opponent with it by not using it to attack to initiate the fight and then using it randomly throughout the fight. Stone Sorcery tosses a boulder in an arc-like motion, and then when it hits the enemy it does damage, and it also does AoE damage around it. It's probably the simplest of the sorceries, but it's actually pretty fun to use nonetheless. Next up on our list, we have the Frost Gauntlet. The Frost Gauntlet is a medium to long range gauntlet that you can charge up to hit harder. It has the fastest projectile speed in the game, but it also has a decent amount of projectile drop. This gauntlet is basically the closest thing that you'll find to a sniper in this game. It hits really hard, but it's arguably one of the most difficult gauntlets to use in this game. Because it's so difficult and you can hit such long shots with it, that makes the Ice Gauntlet really satisfying to use. But just because it can be played at super long ranges doesn't mean that that's where it's most effective. You really want to find that sweet spot of distance without allowing the projectile to be in the air for so long that your shot becomes basically luck. I actually made a full video on aiming on Spellbreak that can really help you get better with the Ice Gauntlet, so if you're interested in that, be sure to check that out down in the description below. Like I said earlier, the Ice Gauntlet hits super hard, so if you can hit one of these shots in the middle of a fight, it can easily change the momentum of the entire fight. Also, if you can open up with an ice shot, it'll really hurt the enemy and give you a head start in the fight and make it a much easier fight to win. Frost Sorcery creates a ring around you in which the opponents will be slowed until completely frozen. It also destroys incoming projectiles from fire, lightning, and wind, but it only protects in a donut shape, so projectiles coming from above can still hit you. Next up, we've got Lightning. Lightning is a burst fire gauntlet that's useful at short to medium ranges. It has a fast projectile speed, but its damage drops off pretty quickly, so it's not the best at long ranges. But you can still get a little bit of damage off if you need to. Lightning can be incredibly annoying to play against because it's the closest thing to hit scan. The reason that this is annoying is because it makes it incredibly difficult to escape from. Although it doesn't do the most damage, it puts a timer on the fight because in most close to mid-range situations, the enemy is forced to outdamage you since lightning is so difficult to escape from. It basically forces the other player to have to try to blow you up, or else they essentially just die. This is because if they don't kill you fast enough, lightning is so easy to do damage with that eventually you'll just tickle them down. As you can imagine, that makes this gauntlet really strong against players that are already hurt. Lightning Sorcery creates a circle on the ground where after a short period of time, lightning will strike, which not only does damage but also stuns the player that it hits. This sorcery will only hit the player that is nearest to the center of the circle. This sorcery doesn't only hit enemies, it also hits you and your allies. So when you cast this sorcery, be sure that it's an enemy that's going to be nearest to the center of it when it goes off. Our fourth gauntlet is the Fire Gauntlet. This is a short to medium range gauntlet with medium time in between casts. It also has a medium projectile speed with little to no projectile drop. This is essentially the rocket launcher of Spellbreak. If you've played Overwatch, it's very similar to Pharah's rockets. This gauntlet is pretty hard hitting, and if you can hit all of your shots, you can kill someone really quickly. Flame is probably the most used gauntlet by top tier players because you can play it fairly consistently once you learn it, and Flame mixed with good movement and rune usage is really strong, and it's also super fun to play. The sorcery for this gauntlet creates a wall of flames that damages anyone that enters it. This is really useful for cutting off areas of the map, but it could also be used defensively to block incoming ice or toxic damage. If you do happen to catch somebody in the flame wall, it does damage while they're inside of it, but it also sets them in fire and does damage over time after they leave it. This sorcery seems really simple, but you can use it in a lot of creative ways. Next up, we've got the Wind Gauntlet. The Wind Gauntlet is a short to medium range weapon with short time between casts. Its projectiles also move pretty quickly, although they do disappear after a short amount of time of being in the air. As of right now, Wind is largely a utility gauntlet. It really just isn't that great for straight up damage. Just because it doesn't do a lot of damage doesn't mean that it isn't useful though. Wind will actually destroy incoming fireballs and keep going. This will allow you to block fireballs and do a bit of damage to the person trying to use fire against you. It's also pretty good at finishing off that last bit of health an enemy has to secure the kill. I don't really recommend using the Wind Gauntlet unless you're using the Tempest class along with it, because the Tempest class adds so much to the gauntlet. It allows you to wind jump and also use your tornadoes to launch you up into the air. This adds a whole new level of mobility to your playstyle. The tornado is the sorcery of the Wind Gauntlet, and it actually does no damage when placed. But what it does is it pulls players towards it. The pull is actually stronger if the player that is being pulled is in the air. So you definitely don't want to jump away from tornadoes. Although by themselves they do no damage, if you combine them with Flame or Toxic, it does AoE damage around the tornado. This sorcery can really disrupt fights as it messes up players' movements. The last gauntlet we have is Toxic. Toxic's primary attack throws out a fan of toxic projectiles. Toxic is a short-range gauntlet with short time between casts. It has a relatively slow projectile speed and it has large bullet drop. Toxic is basically the shotgun of Spellbreak. If you're using the Toxic Gauntlet, you want to be basically right on top of your enemy. This is because the more projectiles you hit with it, the more damage you do. Toxic damage also applies corrosion to your enemy, which does shield damage over time. If your enemy still has shield, this is actually really useful for tracking them because the damage being done by your corrosion basically gives you wall hacks and just makes big numbers pop up above your enemy, which makes them a lot easier to see. Toxic Sorcery throws out a cloud of toxic gas. This does damage to people inside of it and also applies corrosion. This mixed with fire is one of the most useful combinations in the game for damage. Shooting a toxic cloud with fire turns it into dragon fire and does 2 ticks of 20 damage to anybody that's inside of it while it's on fire. Since this is an AoE spell, this is an easy 40 damage and can be used to open fights or finish fights. This is definitely one of the first combinations I recommend you learn. If you can't tell by now, there really is no best gauntlet in Spellbreak. Each gauntlet is the best in its own particular way. Like we were just saying, Toxic is really good up close and Frost is really good far away. Oh, please. Ooh-wee. Because each gauntlet is useful in its own situation, this allows you to create your own playstyle in Spellbreak and play exactly how you want to. You pretty much always want to use the gauntlet for the class that you pick. So if you're playing the Pyro class, you want to use the Flame Gauntlet. That's because the class that you pick directly buffs the gauntlet that you're using. But just because you're playing that class doesn't mean that it has to be your main gauntlet. Personally, I recommend keeping the gauntlet of your class on your right hand. This is because if you get into the habit of carrying more than 2 gauntlets, you can switch out the gauntlet on your left hand for the gauntlet in your inventory. This keeps your class gauntlet on your right hand at all times and allows you to get the benefit of your class no matter what. Personally, I play Toxic or Tempest at the moment, so I either keep my Wind or my Toxic class on my right hand, and I'll usually keep a Fire and an Ice and switch between them throughout the game. Once you get the gauntlets down, I definitely recommend learning how to gauntlet swap. It's pretty simple, it's essentially just changing weapons like in any other game. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below or check out the live stream and ask me directly. Unfortunately, Spellbreak is down until March, but I'll be playing other games until then, and feel free to come and ask me about the other games or Spellbreak or whatever you want. So yeah, just check out the live stream down below. I really hope you found this video useful. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I've got a whole bunch of other videos on this channel that you probably find useful if you're learning to play Spellbreak, and just gameplays and stuff too, so feel free to check out the rest of the channel. Anyways, I hope you guys have a good day. My name is Marcus, aka Apostle, and I'll see you guys next time.